Your portfolio is way riskier than you think. Way. I'm going to prove it. It's easy to prove, actually. It's silly that stocks are less risky for the long run. Okay. All right. So that's why I always say you got to have like a barbell strategy, a more conservative portfolio. You just got to have cash on liquidity. You got to have liquidity, and liquidity means you have access to investments that are not subject to market volatility. That's liquidity. Cash, CDs, just money market accounts. All right, so let's read this by my man Michael Edison, who's my go-to. He's my mathematician in chief, if you will. And I like Michael. He lives in Hong Kong. I think he lives in China someplace, maybe Guangdong. I think it's Hong Kong. His favorite restaurant in Hong Kong is Shitty Walk. Hello, Shitty Walk. I take your order. Oh my goodness, it's so funny. If you know what I'm talking about with Shitty Walk, put it in the show notes, and then just say something in there. And, I'll love you forever. I love you forever. Anyway, so my man, writing in March of 2020, remember, during the midst of the pandemic, he says, or the beginning of the pandemic, he says, suppose that 3 months ago, someone had asked you what the probability was that a virus could cause the stock market to crash in 2020. Well, I take issue with Michael, because the virus didn't cause anything. It didn't cause the stock market to crash. Human beings caused the stock market to crash. This virus didn't. I still find it funny at the end of the day. Fauci says in New England Journal of Medicine in February 2020 that COVID was a severe flu. And he was completely correct. It was severe. It was flu. But ironically enough, when you actually look at the death studies, no one died from the flu during the whole pandemic. The flu just said, we're gonna back up this year. We're gonna give it over to the COVID. The flu was just gone. No one died from the flu. It's so freaking funny, man. So why isn't anyone? There's narratives to push. Anyway, so you might have said it was 1 in 10,000. Or you might have done a study, albeit utterly lacking in statistical significance, of what happened to the stock market when disease spread in the past. But if you're honest, you would say, I don't know. And then my man Michael Edison talks about this book, a new book, Radical Uncertainty, co-authored by John Kay, a prominent and erudite British economist, and Mervyn King, a former governor of the Bank of England, elucidates engaging length on risks. All right. And he talks about right here. There used to be a joke about the difference between neurotics and psychotics. Neurotics build castles in the air while psychotics live in them. The poster boy for psychotics is David Viniar, who was a chief officer at Goldman Sachs before and during the financial crash. Let's see. Viniar told the Financial Times that in 2007 that we were seeing things that were a 25 standard deviation move 7 days in a row. We're seeing 25 standard deviation moves 7 days in a row. Interesting. I have it on good authority from a friend who had dinner with Nobel laureate Robert Merton after the meltdown of long-term capital management, in which Merton was a principal, that during dinner, Merton shrugged and said what hit LTCM was an 8 standard deviation event. The implication is it couldn't possibly have been predicted. A 25 standard deviation event has essentially a zero probability of occurring even once in the lifetime of the universe. Are you hearing this? A 25 standard deviation has the probability of not even occurring once, has 0% probability of occurring once in the life of the universe. An 8 standard deviation has no more than a vanishingly small one. All right. Why do I point this out? Because what happened during that time of 2020, February to March of 2020. Let's take a look. We're going to ask old Grok here, buddy Grok. And I said to Grok, using a bell curve, how many based on historical numbers, how many standard deviations was the market crash of February to March of 2020? And Grok says it was a 7.72 standard deviation event. Interesting. 7.72. All right, so go back to what Edison, he says, a 25 standard deviation event basically is impossible, but yet it happened in the financial crisis. An 8 standard deviation has no more than a vanishingly small one. And so, what is the exact probability of an 8 standard deviation event happening? So I said to Grok, what is the probability of an 8 standard deviation move occurring over 30 days in the S&P 500 using a normal bell curve? And he gives us a long-term annual return is 10.5. The daily mean return is, you can't hardly see it, but it's very, very small. Expected, so we see the volatility is right here. We got a 15%, which is a conservative estimate for volatility. All right. So we're using a average rate of return 10.5, a daily rate of return of a tiny amount, but then we have a volatility of 15%. All right. So what's the probability of that event happening? In normal distribution, 8 standard deviation move. We calculate the probability of a cumulative return being at least 8 standard deviations from the mean. Interesting. What's the likelihood of that happening? The probability of an 8 standard deviation move, cumulative return of 0.35.4% or greater in the S&P 500 over 30 days, assuming a normal distribution curve with a 15% annualized volatility and a 10% annualized rate of return, is approximately 1.64 to the 10th to the 15th power. Or you can see right there, 1 in 7.91 to the 10th to the 14th power. You can see. Look, that's the probability of that happening. Using a normal distribution, the probability of an 8 standard deviation move, and we already talked about it, is almost a negable chance. However, due to fat-tail dynamics, the actual probability is likely orders of magnitude higher. Well, we know it's orders of magnitude higher because it happened. 100%. It happened. In our lifetimes. 2007 and 8 happened in our lifetimes. 2001 and 2 happened in our lifetimes. 1987, the Great Crash, happened in our lifetimes. The probability of that, in terms of Monte Carlo, you can't even factor that in. In fact, Edison says in here about Monte Carlos right here. Let me go back to the article. He talks about the Nobel laureate and about the guy from Goldman Sachs. Both of these people mistook their model for the real world. In the real world, the events that overtook them could not have been assigned a probability. Interesting. It says if they would have used actual real-world scenarios and not models, which is models are not evidence-based as the term is understood by today's modeling psychotics. Dude, that's why Edison, he doesn't pull back. He doesn't hold punches. I love it. This quote, there are so many fallacies that are accepted as truth because of the unshakable belief in economic models as beginning to resemble, I don't know what that word is, phlogiston theory of combustion that prevailed for years. Perhaps it's true, as physicist Max Planck said, the science advances one funeral at a time, i.e. we have to wait for the current economists to die before we cease to believe deeply in these models. The key to managing risk is it resembles a safety-first approach that Wade Pfau and others have advocated, myself included. These are models like Monte Carlo simulations use Monte Carlo simulations only as ancillary means of foreseeing possible future scenarios or narratives, but they don't substitute these models for the real world. They try to identify reference narratives that are verbose and resilient and try to make them a reality while defending against the risk of failure. Exactly. And look, man, there's nothing wrong with using Monte Carlo, but we just say at the end of the day, just because your Monte Carlo says this, that, or the other, doesn't mean there's less risk. It just means we don't know what the foreseeable future, not the foreseeable, what the future is. We have no clue. And the future includes risks that are just literally impossible, but yet they happen all the time. I got up there. Benoit Mandelbrot talks about the misbehavior of markets, where he talks about the financial models they're completely wrong when it comes to the real risks. Nassim Nicholas Taleb talks about this. These are real risks that are involved in your portfolio. And if you follow the mantra, stocks are less risky in the long term, it's just not true. It's just not true. That doesn't mean you don't own stocks. It just means you have to have some kind of liquidity to protect yourself when the time comes that your model breaks down, because it will, inevitably. And the cash is the only thing that's going to hold you up. And that's just proof. That's all you need right there. That model of a 33% decline in February 2020 to March 2020 should never have happened, ever, in our lifetimes. In fact, in the course of the history of the universe, essentially. And yet it did. It's happened before, and it'll happen again. You got to be prepared. And be prepared is always, don't lose money, is always mantra number one. All right, God bless. Love your thoughts. We'll see you.